we're going to spend the next hour or so talking a little bit about zero defects, beginning to do stuff, because you have been sitting for a while, and we'll get to that in a minute. You saw my boss and his boss, so Peter and Sebastian, talk hopefully relatively passionately about zero defects. Yeah? And I like to think that's within our DNA forever, but more recently. And I think it might, before we start this, might be useful to just perhaps give you a bit of insight into how that started for us. Now, ZD is not a new term. It's 30, 40, 50 years old, so everyone's been using it. But it got a bit of a kickstart in Rolls-Royce in 2015, August is the date, because I went off on holiday. And I came back, and I was quality exec in our rotatives business. There was a massive customer issue, and I think I can name names, to do with Gulfstream aircraft. And my business, one of our facilities, had an issue, a coatings issue, as it happens. Unfortunately, that was about 3-4 weeks behind one other part of Rolls-Royce that also had a massive coating issue. Unfortunately, again, with the same engine at Gulfstream. So you can imagine a very, very unhappy customer. And we were all dragged is the wrong word, but called in front of their board in Berlin, where they came to visit us, where we make those engines make the small engines in Berlin, and said, essentially explain yourself, because we'd pretty much destroyed their production line. So it wasn't a very pleasant conversation. And more conversations followed after that. And Sebastian's predecessor was called to the Christmas do of Gulfstream in Savannah, not necessarily for the turkey, as it turns out, because again, they grilled him and they said, what are you doing to reduce disruption, eliminate disruption, and get to zero defects? Because zero defects is something they were starting to do. And this gentleman said what he was expecting. We've got the production system, we've got quality improvement, we've got all of this. And the story goes, essentially, he sat on a plane on the way back and said, you know what, I don't really have a great answer for our customer as to how we're going to get to zero. And he came back and asked Ian at the time, so to go, what do we do? At which point, it started our juices flowing as to how do we get to zero defects. And what you see, the 7-year journey that Rolls-Royce has gone, it really emanated from that. And it was a change in thinking. It was no longer, whilst we put targets up there, Peter talked about 50% concession reduction and 30% escape reduction. We've had targets, maybe not that ambitious in the past, but the change in thinking was, what will it take to get to zero? Not just get better incrementally, but what will it take to get to zero? And that's a very different thinking. And when you talk to design people and manufacturing, what will it take to get zero defects is a different conversation of, can you just make it a little bit better? And if we're honest, it took a little while for us to get a head around what it would be. And we started talking more about the proactive tools, and it just so happens that AESQ was in parallel developing the standards, so that was helpful. And once we've understood that, actually the next big challenge we had was, it's not just about the tool, it's about the people in the organization. What's the team formation to get to zero defects? And that's the sort of thing that we want to talk about next, because I'm sure you'll have challenges in your business. I think 80%, 90% of the people who are in the quality functions, you're all believers, right? It's who else do we need on the bus, is the conversation. The next bit of today is really around that. But when we launched Zero Defects, we had the 3-day training that AESQ now offers. We had pretty much the equivalent of that, and we took 1,000 leaders to it, and we explained to them what quality was, perhaps the first time. And these weren't quality leaders, these were Sebastian above level, exec level people in every function, finance and purchasing and HR, all of them were taken through this. And we said to them there are 4 principles for zero defects, and these, we borrowed from ages ago, so we didn't invent them. But I thought it'd be useful as a bit of a scene setter before we move on. I do need the slide. Okay, let's see if I remember which way to press. Oh, look at that. Okay, human factors, learning. Okay, I could ask you what these 4 are, but it might be a bit of a guess. So, guess what? Everybody in quality knows that. Interesting, when Sir Henry says strive for perfection, the first thing we get asked is, well, you can't do that. You don't want to be perfect, do you? Because that costs too much. Perfection is just delivering what the customer wants every time. You know that, you're quality people. So we got into a conversation about what does quality mean and what does conformance mean, and the old adage of what's a Rolls-Royce car versus, there's no bad car anymore, but I won't name any. What's that cheap Renault one that they do now? I can't remember now. Anyway. Second one, and this is the important piece, the quality standard is ZD. It's not just get better, it is what will it take? Change your thinking. What will it take to get to zero defects? The third one is the whole thing around proactiveness, right? So you can't inspect quality in. We all have a bunch of inspection because we want to be sure, but it's not foolproof and it's certainly not cost effective. So a lot of the tools that you see in the AS standard are about how do you do stuff proactively. And Peter just slightly mentioned the real challenge we have is when we're all reactive and busy, how do you make the time to? And unfortunately, the only simple answer is 1 hour at a time. You've got to make the time because that 1 hour gives you 2 hours, or 2 hours gives you 4 hours. That's just the way it is, I'm afraid. There's no easy way. I hope through what you've heard, a lot of the foundational stuff is available to you for free on the ASQ website. So hopefully that helps. And the last bit is quality measured through the cost and non-quality. So Peter put in a figure of 180 million up. And in Rolls-Royce, as I'm sure you have, it's very difficult to get an exact number because when you say it's not right first time, it's really difficult. So I've had 2 or 3 attempts at it in my time here. But when you do some benchmark, you Google stuff and you go, what's cost non-quality relative to, say, the revenue of a company? Anyone want to give me a percentage of revenue? Let's say if you're a billion pound business, what do you think cost of quality could be for that business? Be brave, shout.
300 million.
How much?
300 million.
Not far off, right? So I'm sure there's different studies, but 10 to 30% of revenue, right? So if you're a billion pound business, 300 million, which sounds ridiculous, right? But that's what you're talking about. So sometimes my conversation to our cost reduction team is just go get quality right, and you don't need to do anything else. Okay? I'm sure that applies to your businesses as well.